the anti-apartheid movement group, local group in Haringey was being set up, and I remember the founding meeting. The speaker was Alan Brooks, who was a South African, a white South African, who was in exile here. And I remember he explained to us that he'd been detained in South Africa for his support for the struggle, and he couldn't be a prisoner of conscience with Amnesty International because he'd supported the armed struggle of the ANC. I think he might have been in the armed resistance movement, which was the white movement. And that, I guess, that was quite an eye-opener for me to think about. Obviously, that I was in support of what they were doing, but the issue of armed struggle was a controversial one. So it was a learning experience for me to think about that, and to become, to think about why we should support armed struggle and what circumstances that was the correct thing to do. I joined the anti-apartheid movement, and we supported the liberation movements who were, pursuing armed struggle because it was felt they had no alternative. The same in Zimbabwe and Namibia.
We had anti-apartheid groups from Inverness to Exeter, and we had a separate organisation in Scotland. Well, it wasn't separate, it was part of the organisation, and there was Wales Anti-Apartheid Movement as well. And because things had to be done differently in both those countries, Wales because of the language issue, and Scotland because the legal system is different. So those are things that had to be taken into account. But it was just basically a matter of getting people out onto the streets. And our demonstrations were huge. Organised local groups, basically, so that certainly, here there was New Anti-Apartheid Group, there was Tower Hamlets Anti-Apartheid Group, there was Redbridge just along the road, Wharton Forest. So there was one borough in London that did not have an anti-apartheid group, and that was Havering. And we tried. And Havering at that stage was actually a stronghold of the National Front and, British fascists and racists in general. And people were just too scared to go out onto the streets.
Until recently, I was the National Vice President of the PCS Union. And then before that, I was elected to the National Executive Committee of the Union. And in that role, we have subcommittees that have specialist areas of work. So it could be equality. We also have a committee that looks at international work. So when I first became involved in the National Executive Committee, I went on to the international subcommittee because I was interested, I'm an internationalist, I'm interested in human rights and equality and justice, globally. So it was an area of work that I was very interested in. And how some of our work is organised is that our union is affiliated to many different solidarity campaigns for international justice, and AXA was one of those, Action for Southern Africa, the successor organisation to the anti-apartheid movement. And I was asked, would I like to represent PCS on the AXA National Executive, because they had vacancies and they were looking for some more people, and actually they wanted a bit more diversity and equality even in the makeup of their own national executive. So I agreed to go on it, and it made sense to me because my involvement in the anti-apartheid movement and boycott campaign, it was a natural fit for me to be involved in AXA. So I was elected to the National Executive Council and involved in AXA. I think nearly 20 years I've been involved now, and I'm now a trustee of AXA.
Apartheid regime tried killing us. They actually bombed. First one they bombed was the Office of the Committee for Freedom in Mozambique, Angola and Guinea, which was on the day that Angola was getting its independence in 1975. They launched a rocket attack on the ANC offices in Penton Street in Islington, and they firebombed the. We moved into Mandela Street, and then Mandela Street got firebombed, and we thought, we've just painted and decorated this place, and now we've got to do it all over again. But, and yes, they did actually send bombs from the embassy in Trafalgar Square, Rouge First. Then there were people, like Albie Sachs and Father Michael Lapsley, who were bombed but weren't killed. Michael lost both hands and his left eye. Albie Sachs lost his right arm and I think his right eye. So there was that kind of thing going on. Those were quite serious consequences. And we had to make sure, for instance, that people weren't working in the office alone at night. There always had to be 2 or 3 people on duty at any given time. And I mean, it was staff and volunteers that actually had to cover that. So, and that was really, quite seriously important.